like to say peace to all the gods on earth and people of the universe. Peace, Lord. Just wanna let you know the black man's first. Original man. We're gonna drop a little something like this, you know what I'm saying, on how we feel on the real. Check it, son. Who tells you when to work? The devil. Who tells you when you get a day off? The devil. Well, who gives you your pay? The damn devil. And who takes it away? The devil. You mean to tell me that we're still not a slave in the land of the free, in the home of the brave? Knowledge cipher divided by power equals wisdom, but you know we have to stop with knowledge first. Divine evils will disperse and the hearse situation that we in. Some people saying that we're cursed. The lack of the knowledge of ourselves makes it worse. Science that we drop makes the average head burst. So do the knowledge on the very next verse. I didn't come to conceal it, I come to reveal it. The true and living God with the Son of Man. And if you ever need assistance, just take my hand. Black man, be prepared, cause here comes the clan. Now my great-great-grand was hung on a tree by the colored man. You probably know him as a white man. I seen an Oprah Winfrey show. She said that was in the past, but kiss my... Yeah. Now it's time to teach the people why our people's not treated equal. Here's the next sequel. Now brothers say, why you just the church like cause if church was good for us, it wouldn't be on every block of our neighborhood. Just like a liquor store, it just ain't no good. They represent the 10%. Now mama lover has no loot, but she spend the last dime to make sure a child has an Easter suit. What is this with Christmas? I just can't see. Spending your money, giving a credit to a fat man coming down your chimney. Come on, I just can't see it. It's like TV telling lies, see your vision. Haji God is here to make the incision. The soul controller. Yeah, the soul controller. Word is born. The soul controller. The soul controller. Yeah.
University of Sankore at Timbuktu, the last of the great African universities. At the end of that teaching days, and I'm now a professor emeritus, meaning that I'm retired, but I still teach. At the end of that teaching days, they would wander through the great country, Sangay, as honored scholars, and they would give of their wisdom free of charge to the populace. And they were so well thought of, these master teachers, that people would take their goods and their service from one place to the other. And one would consider it an honor for the teacher to stay in their homes. And many times the chair that he sat in is retired, and no one is ever permitted to sit in the chair again unless he's going to get married or he needs some extra wisdom. And these great scholars would wander up and down throughout the country until someone would say, "Oh, Master Teacher, lend me of your wisdom, or will you solve this problem for me?" In reading about this, especially in a book called Timbuktu, the Mysterious, I was trying to decide, what am I going to do when I retire? So, coming here to Reverend Daltrey's church, because I knew him 25 years ago, and because I related to him through the years in his different fights and different struggles, and had a great deal of respect for the energy he still got. Most of mine I've used up. Coming back here to this church and my relationship to him and his effort, I seem to have fulfilled to have more time to teach among the populace and to teach the subjects that you otherwise would not have the time to teach. Now tonight I am taking a subject that might be strange to you, because most of your life you have been trained in an atmosphere that that would tend to make you believe there was nothing of substance before Christ. You look at the world before the European concept of Christianity as a barren world without substance and without spirituality. That is unfair, because that world had more spirituality before the formation, the Western formation of religion, than it has right now. Now, I must distinguish between what I'm talking about so you can understand. I am talking about the European formation of Christianity as against the presence of the spiritual elements in the world that went into the making of the religion, such elements being already in existence 3,000 years before Christ. John Jackson, one of our leading writers, has written a new book called Christianity Before Christ. A lot of people will not read the book solely because they think it offends them. It is an excellent book, because he is not saying there was no religion before Christ. He is saying that the same elements, the same teachings that went in ultimately into the formal making of the religion you call Christianity already existed, and that what you are dealing with is the formalization of the religion as against the existence of the elements that went into the making of the religion. All we are dealing with are the steps of the development. Now, I have to first deal with the history of the world, because you live in a Eurocentric intellectual universe, and the European has brainwashed your mind through the media and through the textbooks and through the magazines into thinking that there was no world of consequence before he arrived, and the Arab has brainwashed you into thinking that there was no world of consequence before he arrived. Now, I want to point to the world that you created before either one of them arrived, that was better than any world that existed after they arrived with their disruptive elements. And I want to show you how to separate Islam from Arabism, and how to separate Christianity from Christendom. Christianity is a religion. Christendom is a European political instrument. Then I want to get one thing across to you which is difficult. That there's a certain kind of cold, brutal mentality in all Europeans, of all persuasions, of all colors, of all politics, that you have to understand. They never worship anything. They never adhere to any politics that fail to accommodate their desire to control the world. Religion to you is religion. It has never been religion to them. It has been a means of controlling power. You are a religious people. They are a power-oriented people. They would not dare practice it in its true sense. Now, what got you into the concept of even thinking that a European could be religious or democratic? The two things he can't afford to be, and if he dared to be either one for 24 hours, he is finished. He can't afford to be there because he will have to admit that you started the humane values that control the world, and that everything of consequence in the world started outside of Europe. This is why he must leave Europe and find things of substance in Africa and say, we started this. All right, let's see if we can use some logic. For most of the existence of Europe, Europe was an ice cap. Why would Europeans get from under the ice cap, go all the way to Africa, develop a civilization better than anything ever existed in the world and more durable because it is still standing after 1,000 civilizations has come and gone and fell? Why would he come from under that ice, find a great civilization, go back under the ice and stay under there for 3,000 years before he built a shoe in Europe or a house with a window? Then he would come and claim something that he had nothing to do with. Now, when the Greek miracle existed, Greece had her relationships with Africa. Most of Europe didn't exist. There was no such thing as Europe, and Europe is an invention anyway. Europe is not even a continent. Have you seen any maps lately? Why the divide? Why the division? It's an extension of Asia. It's just Northern Asia. All right, somebody arbitrarily decided it's a continent. Look at the dictionary definition of a continent. There's no qualification for a continent. All right, now, my main point here is that when the Greek intellectual miracle existed, there was no Europe. Not a single country in Europe existed. There was no Russia, no England, no Scandinavia. None of the countries in Europe existed. And yet every Scandinavian schoolboy, Russian schoolboy, English schoolboy can claim Greece as part of his intellectual heritage. When the Egyptian intellectual miracle existed, it existed in a valley 4,000 miles long, extending into Africa, and at least 16 African countries existed then under different names, but they did exist. And the people who would later be the major population of the country called Egypt, that the Greeks called Egypt, did exist. And they had no relationship with any other people in the world except African people. And there's no way the early people called Egyptians could have been anything other than African people, inasmuch as they had no relationship with any other people. Now, 3,000 years would pass who the people of Western Asia would have a relationship with them, and when they began to have a relationship, that relationship was bad. Nobody ever did African people any favor. Everybody ever came into Africa, came in to take something. And African people don't owe anybody anything. Now, if you understood this, maybe we could free ourselves. We are totally an unobligated people. We don't owe anybody anything anywhere, left or right. Everybody that has come among us have come among us to exploit us, and they have exploited us successfully. Now, let us begin at the beginning, because African people stood alone at the beginning of the world and started humanity, and started a thing as basic as tool making, as basic as making a bucket, a basket, as basic as learning how to use fire, how to bring down animals. Started all of this in the area to the south. When we look at and visualize a map of Africa, you have to visualize the Nile River and realize that that river is like the womb of a woman. And out of this womb came a series of children. Let us not call it civilization. White people have so misused the word civilization until the word has lost its meaning. Let us call it a culture. Came a series of cultures that developed and moved down that river, a great cultural highway, to establish a way of life and to create a way of life, religions and history that is going to be so rich that mankind will steal from them from then on. And the rape of the culture of that river would change the world for all times to come. Now, when a people are lost from their cultural moorings, living in another people's country, or living in a country ruled over by another people, worshiping a God chosen for them by another people, worshiping a God that don't look like them, wearing clothes not of their design, living in a culture that don't belong to them. They live with warped souls and a lack of meaning. This summer in West Africa, I had to remind some of the people with me, so you have been here 2 weeks now. You haven't seen any children fighting. You haven't heard anybody call anybody a bitch. You haven't heard the word MF all the time you've been here. You haven't seen friction among people. And this is because these Africans are in the cultural incubator that created them. In the United States, you are in conflict. You are in conflict, and the people that brought you here are in conflict. Because this container does not fit your soul. It does not fit the soul of the ones who brought you here. It does not fit your soul. You will never be at peace in an alien land where you must compete for everything. You must compete for your bread, must compete for your apartment, must compete for your man, must compete for your woman, compete for your water, everything. You've got to compete with somebody for. Nothing comes automatically. Nothing is built into the culture itself. You came out of a culture where certain things are assured by virtue of coming out of the culture. And you didn't have to fight for them. Because if you obey the laws that govern the culture, the material resources of the culture, based on your need, came to you automatically. These were things of a socialist nature that existed in a culture not only before Karl Marx was born, but before Europe was born. This is why the African states trying to be communists are making a mistake, and this is why all of them will fail. Because the European concept of communism is alien to the soul of Africa. You take the African concept, and it's going to work. Because it was there all along. Because it's a concept that's based on the African culture, in the African indigenous religion, in the African basic humanity. When you take this artificial Western junk, that you're going to build something on it, you're in trouble. Because nothing builds on it. You try to build a house on sand. The foundation is not there. The culture foundation is not there. Now, I realize in a lecture like this, people will hear what you did not say and will stubbornly refuse to understand what you did say, because they have been trained in a certain way, and they have certain images in their mind, certain concepts of the deity they can't get out of their mind. They can't let go the blonde, blue-eyed Jesus that Jewish mythology gave you, who don't even look like a Jew. It's hard to release it from your mind. And you will have less respect for your father in your home until you give up that image. All people in the world paint the deity to resemble the father in the home. There's only one exception: you in the United States. All people in the world paint the deity to resemble the father in the home. The father figure in the image of the deity is always the same in every culture in the world. You living in a brainwashed culture, or been brainwashed by a culture, cannot let go. All right, now, let's go back. What I'm trying to say, and what I'm trying to do, is not to disturb your religion at all. I'm trying to restore a concept of history and a concept of religion to let you know that what you have been worshiping, if you worship Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, as devised, if you worship Islam as devised by the Arabs, Christianity as devised by the Europeans, Judaism as devised by the Jews, you are worshiping up a carbon copy of the original. I want to give you a picture of the original religion before someone tampered with it, changed it around, and made it the deification of their culture and their power desires. To the Western mind, religion is the deification of his culture and his desire for power. The Arabs made Islam a rationale for the slave trade. The Jews made Judaism a rationale for taking land that never belonged to them, not even in ancient times. The European made Christianity a rationale for his prejudice and his enslavement of other people. He never dared to use it in a Christian way. And I'm saying that this is a carbon copy and a debasement of the original. I'm not trying to take it away from you. I'm trying to show you the original copy as against the carbon copy. Now, the carbon copy might frighten you because you're so accustomed, the original copy might frighten you because you're so accustomed to the carbon copy, it might be a little hard for you to take. But all of these religions existed in another form before someone called them by these new names. Now, someone brought up in class last night that Islam came out of Africa. And I said, yes, the elements came out of Africa. But the religion in its formal sense is an AD religion and not a BC religion. Because you cannot bring me in Islam before you bring me the Prophet Muhammad. And the Prophet Muhammad wasn't even born until near the end of the 6th century. Now if you bring me in Islam before you bring me the Prophet Muhammad, you have to tell me where you got it from. If you say the elements that ultimately made the religion existed, I'll accept that. But if you say the religion was there, then I'm going to ask some questions. What are you talking about? Then if you say like some of the brothers in Manhattan, our religion started, God made the first Muslim, his name was Adam, then I have to tell you, when did Adam read the Quran before everybody wrote one? Everybody thinks his religion was there forever, and it is not necessary for your religion to have been there always to be true to you or good for you if you decide that it was good for you. Now, what we have to do is to look at the world before any of these religions came into being in a formal sense, when they existed in an informal sense in their teaching, in the elements that later went into their making existed, but the religion in their formal sense did not exist. And look at now you have to look at the making of the elements in the Nile Valley, the making of the great religions and the great spirituality of African people, when African people had no one in the world to depend on but themselves. You are looking at African people all by themselves. There are no Asians. Europe don't exist. There are nobody involved in this great intellectual show but African people. It is hard for you to conceive that there was a time when you did not ask anybody to do anything, and there was nobody around to show you anything, and you did the greatest thing you have ever done on the earth, and you did things so great that the world is still trying to copy it and trying to learn what it was. And you letting your children come home from school saying that mathematics is hard, he can't add 9 times 9. Said, damn it, if those people built the pyramids before Westerners had shoes, don't be telling me that mathematics is hard. We invented it. And what happened to you is that someone made you lose your confidence in yourself. This is how the European rules the world, by making people lose their confidence in themselves. And once we restore our confidence in ourselves, we're going to first take over ourselves, then we're going to take over the world that we need to control, the big continent of Africa. Then we're going to start with a safety pin, go to a locomotive, and make every damn thing else in the world we need to make. We're going to take off all the clothes we didn't make and start making them ourselves. But in the years, in the thousands of years before anybody broke our confidence in ourselves, let's have a look at what we did as a people before any other people interfered with us. Let's look at that history. All right. In the Nile Valley, in the upper end of the Nile Valley, now the upper means lower to you. The Nile Valley, the Nile River is a contradiction. Most rivers of the world starts in the north and flows to the south. The Nile Valley is a contradiction. It starts in the south and flows to the north. So when I say upper, I mean down south, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia. That's upper. That's where it starts. Those great lakes in the mountains, Lake Tanner, and all those feeds and tributaries that makes the Nile, and it flows to the north. So that's where the culture starts. 4,000 miles before it dumps into the Mediterranean, somewhere near Cairo. All right? I'm talking about the upper, and that's where the incubator that started, that sent the baby down the river to get Egypt started thousands of years before. This is what Chancellor Williams is talking about in his book, The Destruction of Africa, when he calls Egypt Ethiopia's oldest daughter. All right, let's see how civilization was formed in the south at Olave Gorge, Tanzania, in Kenya, in the highlands of Ethiopia. This is where they found the oldest remains of human beings on the face of this earth. Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia. Because Ethiopia, they found skeletons of some of the lady they stupidly called Lucy. Why Lucy, I don't know, but let's be that as it may. It contradicts previous findings because it proves that the bones of a woman can survive for millions of years. Male chauvinism once held sway, and they assumed that because all the previous bones been that of a man, they just proved that they assumed that women's bones were so soft that none of them survived. Here they've not only found a female bones, they even found the bones of female children. So that put that nonsense to rest. But they called her Lucy. Lucy and her family. And she was nearly 5 million years old. Right. Now, one of the oldest in the world was found in Ethiopia, in the hills of Ethiopia. Next find, the previous finds, Kenya. Earliest finds, Tanzania. all over 1 million years old. Now, the oldest find in Europe, the so-called Piltdown man, proved to be a fake. Another found, the oldest in Asia was the Peking man who was only 600,000 years old, just a little more than 500,000. All of them were youngsters in comparison to Africa. But the main point is that on the banks of the Nile River, man got civilized culture underway. And this culture began to people those river banks. You can understand why most human culture started on river banks. And most burial places were on river banks, because the river was a place, water, it was a place where animal life came, and you could slaughter your animal life to eat, and sometimes you used as a human burial ground. It was also a place where many times you buried the bones of the animal, or you just left them there. Most human remains, human and animal, been found along river banks. Some of the rivers have dried up, and they're called wadis. These are rivers that no longer have water. This is why the great archaeological digs are along river banks, especially indentations in the earth where rivers used to be. All right, now, the greatest riverbank in the world, and the richest riverbank area in the history of the world is the Nile River area. Now, the rich earth coming down from Ethiopia started that river to overflow. It started erratic at first. Then finally it began to overthrow at a regular basis. And when it began to overthrow at a regular basis, man knew exactly when to get out of the way, when to come back, and to plant in the rich black soil along the river banks. Now you have the world's first agriculture. You have the first nation that can engage in massive feeding. You've got the first supply of durable food, storable food. And what is this storable food? Dried beans. No refrigeration. Keep them at a certain temperature, they'll stay indefinitely. Now you've got a nation with enough food supply to attract large numbers of people. And if you go to Egypt and see the temples, the pyramids, and the Sphinx, look at the ground. They're nearly always on high ground. So in the period when the Nile overflowed to deposit its richness on the banks, during that period was the period when they built the pyramids and the Sphinx in the great temple. Now, a whole lot of mythology about these monuments being built by slave labor is pure nonsense. Slave labor has never been that efficient. These monuments are built so well, some have been there 5,000 years. And that stone was laid together without any cement, any bonding agent. And the stone was laid so unique that you can't even sandwich a playing card in between the seams after 5,000 years. Slaves are not that efficient. What the hell does a slave care one way or the other, whether things done well or not? Now I'll come to the point about whether the Jews were slaves in Egypt. It's not going to take me long to dismiss that one, you know. I ain't going to waste too much time on that one. But now, let's see the development. Now, When you meet the people later called Egyptians, remember the Egyptians never called that country Egypt. This is a Greek name. They call it Tamari. They call it Sais. They call it a number of names, but never Egypt. The ancient Hebrews call it Miriam, Mizraim, but never Egypt. The Greeks call it Egyptus, and it later became Egypt. The Greeks were great namers. The Romans were great renamers. They weren't very smart. Not very smart today. No offense to the Italians, but the Jews have always managed the mafia. Today. If anybody belongs to the mafia here, just ask them to name your Jewish clerk. You think the Italians manage the mafia? You think they're that smart? Come on. All right, let's go on with the lecture. Now, we're talking about a period in Egyptian history called the pre-dynastic period. And we're trying to explain something which a lot of teachers go over without explanation. Why is it that the Egyptians had no Stone Age period? They moved down the river with a civilization already full grown. No formative period. They had their development in the south. When they moved from the upper to the lower, to the period, to the place called Egypt, the question about the formativeness, early civilization, was settled. Now, what now must they settle? Pre-dynastic. Pre-dynastic means, first place, what is a dynasty? A dynasty is nothing but a family. Pre-dynastic means this is the period before they decide which family is going to be in charge. And once they decide which family is coming to power and how they're coming to power, they start the dynastic period. And now they're on the way. In that first dynastic period, about 5,000 years ago, would bring to power a king called Minos in the north, called Numa by the southerners. He must have been a king of some substance, otherwise they would not have built an entire city in his honor called Memphis, not Tennessee, Memphis in Africa, long before America. Now the second dynasty wasn't impressive, but it was a holding dynasty. I mean, things didn't get worse, didn't get better, didn't get worse. That's what you mean, a holding dynasty. But when we come to the third dynasty, 2800 BC, now we have to pause. Now we've got to slow down. This is one of the great dynasties in history, not because it was just a dynasty, but because of the certain personality that emerged during that dynasty that influenced the world of today. The king was Zusa. The personality that was his grand vizier, our prime minister, was a multi-genius named Imhotep. A man so talented that his talent would influence the world of that day, and it is still influencing the world of this day. He built the step pyramid. He was a doctor. He was the real father of medicine. He was a philosopher. He started the gathering of the intellects that later resulted in the establishment of the mystery school in the Great Lodge at Luxor. This is the embryo of what's going to be the world's first university. He lived 2,000 years before the Greek, who's called the father of medicine, and he was the real father of medicine. And Hippocrates, who's supposed to be the father of medicine, said that I am the child of Imhotep. And when I asked black doctors to stop this nonsense about the Hippocrates oath and change it to the Imhotep oath, they thought I was crazy. When I asked that one of the pavilions in Harlem Hospital be called the Imhotep Pavilion. His grave was excavated about 20 years ago by Professor William Emery of London. Now we have not only information on him, we have his actual medical tools in existence. There's no question about who he was. In the air was no Greece. Greece didn't exist. England didn't exist. They were in caves painting themselves blue. Rome didn't exist. We're talking about a time there wasn't no Europe. And we're talking about a time before Africa was invaded by the Asians. The first trouble in Africa came from the Asians. All right. That third dynasty, the Builders dynasty, the step pyramid would set in motion the concept of massive building, massive temple building. Now man began to build houses with more than one story, because that's what the step pyramid looked like. A house built on top of a house. Now the concept of building changed after Imhotep. Now history would take a great leap forward, not only materially but intellectually. The next 6 dynasties will be the dynasties of the building of the Great Pyramids, the Sphinx. The next 2,000 years would be the foundation years for mankind. The Africans would bring into being the basic foundation that man would later call civilization. And he would develop so much in that Nile Valley that man be still copying from. He would develop the laws of object. He would develop religion that says, if you got a God, you got to have a goddess. All right, now we're into something now which you in the West have lost and never conceive. I mean, if you got a male, you got to have a female counterpart. That was a part of the total culture. We're into the matrilineal at an early age in history. That the lineage comes down through the female side of the family. So respect for the female was built into the structure of the society itself, something the European woman never had and do not have to this day. Her respect was not something she had to grow up and demand. It was built into the society itself. The foreigner changed the concept, changed the matrilineal to the patrilineal, because the foreigner was afraid of women. last drastic change came with Islam. The greatest change of that structure came with, in the last change came with Islam. Every foreigner challenged that structure. And yet, today, most African societies have a matrilineal system of inheritance as against the patrilineal, meaning that the line of descent comes down to the female side of the family as against the male side of the family. Something that never existed in Europe and don't exist in Europe to this very day. Now, what is more important is that out of this period came goddess as well as gods. And the best known of the goddess was the goddess Hathor. And that her influence was so great that it spread to Asia, and the concept of the sacred cow in India came from an aspect of the religion of Hathor. And when you see her drawn in history, you will see a female with a cow's body. It was the sacredness of this image that gave them the concept of the sacredness of the cow. And that this is part of the Hindu religion. This is part of where the sacred cow concept came. Now, if you read a book like John Jackson's Pagan Origins of the Christ Myth, which most people are not going to read his Christianity Before Christ, another book, this is a brother, Man, God, and Civilization. Now, I can stay here the rest of the night just rattling off books of depth by white writers as well as blacks. But I'm just rattling over the black ones first. We read Dr. Ben's African Origins of Major Western Religions. This Africa mother of Western civilization. We haven't been delinquent on the subject. We're teaching in the classroom, writing it in books, screaming at it. You know what kind of problem? It had nearly 3,000 years without a major war. You know what kind of progress a people can have in a time like this? Now the war is going to come. But famine from Western Asia is going to cause migrations from Western Asia. And a people is going to come in from Western Asia called Hebrews, later called Jews. Africans are going to feed them, save them from famine. This is a footnote now. Later on, 1680 BC, a bunch of sheep herders going to invade Africa, called the Shepherd Kings later. The Hebrews that the Africans saved from famine, gave jobs to, befriended, slept with African women, sex politics again, haven't learned yet. Instead of joining the Africans against the invaders from the east, they joined the invaders from the east, became collaborators and clerks for the new rulers of Egypt. Now you think if Jesse Jackson knew this, he would apologize for using the word army? This is the first recorded betrayal of African people by the people called Hebrews, later called Jews. Okay? I'm saying you never had any friends, you haven't got any now. If you want any, look in the mirror. All right? They join the enemies of Africa. And while the foreigners are ruling Africa, they become the clerks of the foreigners. And they produce the world's first wheeler-dealer politician, a man called Joseph, the provider. Then, as the Bible said, Joseph dies, Joseph's people dies, then a king arose who knew not Joseph. Now, let's locate the king who knew not Joseph. Let's look at the biblical side, then let's look at the pure history side. Who was coming to power now? King who knew not Joseph. From the south, every time North Africa is in trouble, a king comes from southern Africa to rescue. Moses came up, kicked out the foreigners, and brought the Seti kings to power. And from the Setis would come the mighty 18th dynasty. Now that the foreigners are gone, the Africans looked around and saw the friends of the foreigners. So what you still doing here? Now, but the African in his customary generosity said that those of you who wish to obey African law may stay, though you betrayed me. Those who do not wish to obey African law will have to go. Now you have another version of the Exodus. You can take your version, I'll take mine. Those who decided they weren't going to obey African law left. Those who decided they would obey stayed. There was a 16-mile land bridge connecting Africa with Western Asia. So nobody had to leave by sea. Now, while there in Africa, they copied a lot of African folklore and mythology. There in Africa, they became a people. There in Africa, they entered world history. They copied the negative confessions. They extracted 10 of those confessions that became the 10th Commandments. An Egyptian prince who grew up in the house, the royal family, convinced them and gave them 10 of the 47. And I must say he did a good job because he picked the 10 best. All he did was to change the language around. You should read a book called The Coming Forth by Night in the Day that the Europeans call the Book of the Dead. No, read them for yourself. Don't take my word. Read the negative confessions that's put down by the Africans. These were nothing but the examination questions, the examination confessions at the Great Lodge at Luxor. You stand before the lodge, and this is purification rites. I have not been guilty of murder. I have not been guilty of violating my neighbor's wife. I have not been guilty of thus and so. Or you, at the end of your teaching, you are telling your teachers that you are good enough to continue to pursue your studies at this great lodge. You're saying that I have not been guilty of thus and so. You know, he just changed the language around and said, I shall not. And you can pick up the 47 and you can find out exactly where he took the 10 from. I must say he did an excellent job of extraction. All right, now, be that as it may, the Bible gives him one Ethiopian wife. My research gives him 3. We call this a taste for chocolate, and we'll just go along with it. But that's all right. We still got that taste in spite of the color purple. That taste is still prevailing. Now, you came out of a society that where there's no historical record of any man striking a woman. But in another time, we will discuss where did the woman strikers came from in this society among us, and how do we develop the habit here if we didn't have it over there. That's another lecture, a lecture for a sociologist other than a historian. But what we're trying to get at now is that there was a recovery of sovereignty. The foreigners are gone. Now we have another 1,000 years of comparative peace. Now the long summary. The 18th dynasty, one of the greatest dynasties ever to sit on any throne of any country at any time in the history of the world. This is the dynasty that finished driving out the last of the foreigners. At the top of the dynasty, a family, Thutmose or Thutmosis. Thutmosis the first, wounded in the fight against the foreigners. That's the father. His son, the second, married to his daughter, Hatshepsut. But he has confidence in the daughter and says that after he's gone, the daughter will be Pharaoh, not queen, and she shall be treated as a Pharaoh and given the respect of a Pharaoh. They hears him say this, but they don't believe it and have no intention of giving her that respect. You have to understand marriage. When people marry their sisters in ancient Egypt, they do not cohabit with them. This is merely to keep the royal lineage within the family. That brother didn't treat her well. She bided her time. Then the third brother, Thutmose the third, when it came his time, he tried to push her aside. And thanks to history, she had enough strength to put him aside. And she became not queen, but Pharaoh of Egypt. And sometime to prove her point, she wore a false beard, disguised as a man. Not disguised as a man, but taking on some of the trappings of a man. And sometimes she sculptured that way. She did not have to fight many wars. She went over in the east and spanked those people, let them know who was the boss of Egypt. She went down south and let those people know that, look, I'm your relative, so you shouldn't be, I don't want no trouble from you. She didn't get any. Further to the south, she let them know that they were relatives. She started what might be the diplomatic corps, sending emissaries down the coast and sending eventually to Egypt, to Kingdom of Kameh that later became India, and to China. And that relationship lasted for 1,000 years. She built her famous temple that's still there, one of the most beautiful temples in the world. Built it so well she could have a regiment of 3,000 soldiers in her basement. If any trouble started, she could walk to a certain part of the room and stomp her feet, and people would be at her assistance almost over in a minute. wise and brilliant woman, the first great female ruler of history that we have a record of. She came out of the 18th dynasty. After her mysterious death, 21 years or 31 years, depending on the book, what book you're reading, the brother who was angry because she kept him out of power, Thutmose III, came to power. The one thing she had taught him is what power was. While he was angry with her, she did send him on missions where he could learn power. And when he came to power, he was one of the greatest, one of the most powerful pharaohs of all. He ruled all northern Africa, parts of Western Asia, parts of the South. Had more land territory than 3 times more than the Roman Empire. And with his passing came the pharaoh, what I call the pharaohs of flowers, fire, and thunder. But the most noted pharaoh to come to power didn't want power at all after him. This was the son of the great Queen Tide, Amenhotep IV, who came to power as Akhenaten, the poet, religious reformer, who got tired of the multiplicity of gods and announced the concept of one God. Multiplicity of religions and announced the concept of one religion. And this put a whole lot of preachers out of business. They had no protection of their God. When he announced the concept of one God, then a whole lot of preachers had no work to do. So they didn't particularly like him. And when his enemies approached Queen Tide, who didn't particularly like the new religion, they thought they would recruit her against him. She was a Nubian, as most of the queens came from the South, and were black, of course. And she said that, although I differ with this new religion, you must remember, differ with this new religion, you must remember, that is my son, flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood. And if you harm so much as one hair of his head, Queen Tide, let it be known that her disagreement with the new religion did not mean that she would take sides against the enemies of her son. That her disagreement was a private matter, but her defense of her son was another matter. And he lived with his wife, the beautiful Nefertari. He humanized the Egyptian monarchy. He permitted himself to be sculptured, showing affection with the children on his knee. He was probably the world's the first humanistic monarch. My main point is that he brought to the concept of being a royal person a sense of warmth and genuine human value never shown in history. And he opened the door for the boy king who had married one of his daughters, known as Tutankhamun or King Tut, who came at the close of the 18th dynasty. Now, what I'm talking about is the end of a great period in human history. At the close of the 18th dynasty, a period of great religious reform. Now Now we would have still another great dynasty, the dynasty of the Ramesses. And this dynasty would be the last great dynasty in Egypt and in the Nile Valley. The last purely African in every way. And out of this dynasty would come a series of kings called Ramesses, but Ramesses II would be the greatest. And he would rule with a Nubian queen, Nefertari. And this relationship did not start in love. Those Nubians had come and beat the hell out of the Egyptians, and the only way they could stop the war is to marry one of those Nubian women. And he thought so much of her, he would build a temple for her equal to his at Abysimba on the Nubian border, the border to what is now the Sudan. This became one of the most beautiful love stories in royal history. Now the dynasty is waning, and the power and the structure is moving once more toward the south, toward Ethiopia, that will send many kings and queens, the best known in history but not the best. It's a queen named Makeda, better known as the Queen of Sheba. Now, the story of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon is too well known, and most of it is a fake anyway. Partly Jewish folklore. Sir Henry Boyd has written a much better story, and Pankhurst in her cultural history of Ethiopia has written also a good story on this. Now, because I'm a classroom teacher, I have to distinguish between folklore and fact. When I read the biblical story, then I have to go back and read the pure history story without the mythology. So in the classroom, sometimes I say, this is the biblical story, this is the pure history story. But I've got to give the pure history story in the classroom. And I give an exam. I never give an exam on the biblical story. I give an exam on the pure history story, not on the folklore. Because I know I have to distinguish between one and the other. Now, my point is that Egypt grew weak. The last 4 dynasties between 20 and 24 were weak dynasties, what I call holding dynasties again. Egypt grew weak. Its influence in the south was barely tolerable. Now 3 great generals moved up from the south and took over Egypt. Starting 751 BC. Now the great light is going out. The first general is Castor. After Castor, Pianki, who ruled as long as he wanted to, retired to the south. Arthur Wagel and his great personalities of antiquity calls his chapter on Pianki The Adventures of a Nigger King. He was boss of that Nile River. He went down, and the thing about it, he not only moved down and conquered that whole Nile River and conquered all North Africa, most of the time he didn't kill nobody. He just marched the army to the gate and said, send your army out so they can see who they got to fight. They looked out and saw who they got to fight, and give up. I give up. Marched in, didn't kill nobody. He outlawed the concept of spending a whole lot of money on tombs and spent the money on the people. They never lived so well as during the period of Pianki. After Piyanki, the last of the great African land conquerors to come from the south, Tahaka, conquered all North Africa, all Western Asia, called the Middle East. The first king to wear the double crown, indicating that he was the master of the lower and the upper Nile. Africa's walk in the sun was supreme. This was the finale. Now, you can say it fell, but remember, it lasted over 5,000 years and fell. That's a long time. And after it fell, for 6 more dynasties. These were the dynasties of the bastards. Mixed Greek, mixed Roman, mixed everything. Sellouts. Alexander would come, marry so many of his Greek generals into Egyptians. They would start fighting among each other. And they would, these silly Europeans did not understand when you marry your sister, you didn't go to bed with her. They started going to bed with her. Didn't understand the custom, didn't understand the culture. Then began to murder each other. And Cleopatra, we won't get into this too deeply because Cleopatra was actually married to Caesar, and she was actually married to Mark Antony, because the only way you could wield power in that day, you had to be married to into the royal family. Caesar had a Roman wife, and Mark Antony had a Roman wife. Cleopatra was jiving both of them. But for her wares, she got Caesar and Mark Antony to keep the worst aspect of Roman colonialism from the backs of her people. You can say that she sold her charms to save off the worst aspect of Roman rule for her people. Then I can say that, well, she got more for it than most women. And did more with it. She held an empire at bay. Jived those Caesar and Mark Antony. Mark Antony, love-struck fool, she told him not to face Octavius, who's going to become Caesar Augusta later. Caesar Augusta, Octavius, was the brother-in-law of Antony's Roman wife. And he was angry because he had married, you married my sister, and you married her one evening and left for Africa the next evening without even spending a night with her, and here 3 years later, hanging out with Cleopatra, 2 babies later, 3 years and 2 babies later. How dare you hang out here with this African holla and my sister pining away for you in Rome? But he was to meet his brother-in-law on the field of battle with a scrubby Egyptian army. He would throw that against that mighty Roman army. And of course he would lose. Then Cleopatra would fake it suicide, and he killed himself thinking Cleopatra is dead. And in his death agony, he found out that Cleopatra is not dead. Now, Cleopatra trying to jive Octavius, who hates her guts, because she took the man from his sister. You got to study history and the gospel history. All right, now, Octavius reduces Egypt to the status of a colony. All the privileges Egypt has gotten under Cleopatra has gotten from Caesar and Mark Antony has been taken away. Now, can you see Cleopatra as a politician, not as a sex pot? Can you see her without Hollywood maneuvering those two men to save her country? However, but now, Octavius moves down to Ethiopia, to one of the Candace queens. He falls in love with this one, tries to knock over her country, and she knocks over him. And never let him speak to her directly once. Every time he wanted to speak to her, he had to speak to her language. Because certain royal people don't let you speak to them directly. Mooned and June around Ethiopia for months. Gave her a fleet of battleships for her birthday. The answer was still no. According to the Kiba Negas, he said, if thou wilt not let me kiss thy feet, thy lips, without let me kiss thy feet. Kiss the feet and sail home. Answer was still no. Now, Rome at last had Egypt. Now Rome is cutting off the Greek traffic between Egypt and Greece. Cleopatra couldn't possibly have been Greek because the traffic had been cut off before she was born. She was Greek in name only. Not worth an argument one way or the other. It takes a Greek to get a Greek, and one of those Greeks around to get her when she was born. The Greek blood was very thin in the first place. It was only about 30 generals married into the Egyptian monarchy. This is not the fact. This is not what I'm driving toward. The Romans craved another part of Africa, craved a city called Carthage. Craved it because it was the leading commercial city in North Africa. And it outrivaled Rome. And they spoke to each other in the morning. They were so committed and so obsessed with its destruction. Good morning, Roman citizen. Carthage must be destroyed. Yes, Carthage must be destroyed. They never answered why. Europeans never want to share. They want everything. Hannibal took the war to them. And for nearly 20 years, he held them at bay. Finally, worn, getting old, they pushed the old lion back home. Now, in partial defeat, he looked for 2 Africans to assist him, and they failed him. Scipio Africus and Maecenacius. When they failed to hold his flanks and the Romans came down on him, he took some dependable African poison and called it a day. With the passing of Hannibal, the last great African military genius of the ancient world was gone. The Romans destroyed the city, plowed salt into the earth. This was the Asian orange of that day. Now the Romans had North Africa. So accustomed to killing, they began to kill animal life wholesale. Began to kill each other. The Africans, after a while, began to call on new gods and distrust old gods. Began to turn to their folklore. harmony out of their folklore. They brought forth a new meaning and asked for new deities. But on the eve of this happening, the Romans were making jokes of their weakness because they were worshiping gods that breathed fire and glorified murder. The God that suits the European temperament, gods that breathe fire and glorified murder. The Christian God never suited his temperament then, don't suit his temperament now, and probably never will. He came out of a thawed icebox, and he has a temperament that is at war with harmony of the earth. The African values and the African concept of spirituality produced a religion that is at harmony with nature. That is the basis of the pre-Christian African religions. That is the basis of the elements that went into the making of the religion that became Christianity. That man must be in harmony with nature. Man must not be in a violent struggle against the elements. And that man and God and nature are in partnership one to the others. And all of the elements work with man, and all life is linked together in cause and effect. In a harmonious chain, there was no death, but a continuation of life. And the European concept of life is a violation of harmony. When you look at Russia and the United States, look at their struggle to control the world, it makes no sense. It is out of harmony. Not only with nature, it is out of harmony with common sense. It is a violation of nature to poison the air, to endanger babies. Nature gave you fresh air to breathe. You throw everything out of harmony when you put poison in the air. Nature and God being one and the same, let us assume that at least God knew what he was doing. When God created the spring, when God created wind to purify the air, he didn't do this for man to put chemicals and spoil the air so that a child couldn't breathe. The African thought about all of this as part of the totality of life. So his religion stemmed out of bringing life in line with the harmony of God's creation. And this European now about to come on the scene to force a religion into being in defense of his disharmony would throw the world out of kilter, then not understanding the religion, he would adopt the religion after he finished killing Christians. He would become a Christian thinking he would find another element of control. Then he would throw that out of harmony with itself because he didn't understand it then, don't understand it now. And if we are to create a new way and a new harmony and a new decency for all people, we must bring things in harmony with nature. Because this is the basis of what this ancient African did. This is why he could have 3,000 years without a war. Look at the building you can do. Look at the siren you can do. Look at the children you can raise. Try to claim it. They claimed it for everybody but you. And in looking at this first phase of the civilizing of the world before the formation of what you call Christianity, in looking at yourself today with deteriorating communities, with bad education systems, it looks as though it is impossible that we as a people will ever recover. But we've been hit hard before, we've been knocked down before, we've been troubled before, and we've come out of it before. And what you have to understand, that you have a great spirituality as a people, and you've come out of great things, and you have to say to yourself, fruits have grown in harder rocks than these, and we have come up from harder falls than these, and that we as a people, if we have done this once, we will do it again, and we will do it now. Thank you.